Okay, it looks like we're live. Hello, Park Slope Together. We're here for our final Meet the Candidate chat of this week. I'm Sony, and we are here with, you're up here, Christy.
I am at that. I'm Christy.
Although we learned this yesterday. The order that I see you all in is not the order it shows up in. So where I'm pointing makes no sense.
None.
I know what you mean,
So just
though.
But we are joined tonight by Jessica, who is a Park Slope resident. Jessica Simmons is a council candidate. She has been a principal at Brownsville Collegiate and a teacher in the LA Unified School District. She is on the CEC parent board of District 13. And her son is in school at PS 33. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Jessica and I have talked about this a bit. Jessica is a recent addition to the slate of candidates, and she had an unusual experience. Jessica, share with us what happened and how you got to be here now.
Sure. Thank you for giving me space to talk about why I think we need reform at the Board of Elections. But I'll actually back up a little and say, I've been thinking about running as far back as December, which isn't as far back as other candidates. Some of my colleagues have been running for over a year. But there's actually I've learned so much along the way, everything from the fact it actually takes female candidates longer to decide, should I run, given my factors of family, school, work. I'm still working while I do this. And also just all the little steps you have to take as a candidate. So you have to start a bank account, and that's when you find out that there's certain banks that will take bank accounts and others that won't. And political insiders apparently have this special list, and those of us coming in don't. It's, COVID, everything else, it has been quite a journey. But what you're asking about was actually my experience at the Board of Elections. So I like to think of myself as someone who's been in education, has dealt with a lot of red tape, really understands how bureaucracies work, worked in the biggest school districts in the country. So I thought it just took some research and education and just lots of questioning to understand what the rules were so I could get on the ballot. Because if you're not in this process, you may not know I can decide to run in December, January, February, but you have to get signatures of community members to get on the ballot, which makes a ton of sense to make sure you're a legit person out there talking to people. And so I had my signatures gathered, and my husband was helping me. I'm running quite a grassroots campaign, and we live in Park Slope, and he works in the city. So he decided to head to his office and drop them off at the Board of Elections for me. And that was the first step in a series of small missteps, misunderstandings. I could talk for an hour about all the details of what went wrong, but what we found out was it's not enough to just educate yourself on the process and follow all the rules and you have to hand in a cover sheet with all your petitions. And we were actually joking. My husband said, everybody else has lawyers. And there was a moment where we were like, ha, ha, ha. Why would we spend our money on lawyers? Well, you need to spend your money on lawyers because it's very difficult to hand in the paperwork and have it received without any errors on anyone's end. And so the gist of the error we had was that they issue you a sticker when you hand in your petition. So my husband said, here's Jessica Simmons' signatures. They say, here's your sticker. So my husband said, cool, I got a receipt. He wrote the number on the cover sheet. Sticker's not a receipt. And that wasn't online. We'd only looked up till you hand it in. The sticker is actually the identification number that needs to go on the ballots. So the first mistake my husband made was he walked away with the sticker. So then the second mistake was then the Board of Elections said I couldn't be on because the numbers didn't match. So we had to go back. The very long bureaucratic story, but the main thing is that the Board of Elections, they would say they are not allowed to. I would say it's very disappointing that they they're not there to help you. Like in my experience in school districts, even the most disgruntled bureaucrat will help you do something, even if it means like less work for them. At the Board of Elections, they didn't say to my husband, just put the sticker on the petitions. And their lawyer would say, they're not supposed to, because then we could hold them accountable for making the errors. But it was just a really disappointing introduction to running for city council. We ended up having to get lawyers, finding lawyers that were not tied to other candidates that could represent me and go to court within 2 days, waiting for a judge. I mean, it was a lot of time and money, all for me to argue it's called a technical error. It wasn't anything fraudulent. And so therefore they should allow me back on the ballot, which the judge then ruled in my favor. So it has been a learning experience. And I know, we all hear stories about the Board of Elections all the time, but I think just these little barriers that if you don't know the right person to talk to, if you haven't done it before, if you don't have a campaign staff, you might not know, which I know now, that you need to put all these things in place so you're not losing time, momentum, or money with some of these obstacles. So I'm here for reforming the Board of Elections.
So since we're kind of building for you a little bit more of a background and your intentionality behind running, which exists for the other candidates in a different way, tell us about how you made the decision to run, how you got to this point in the first place.
Sure. So I've been in education for over 20 years. As you mentioned in the introduction, I started as a teacher in 2000 in Los Angeles, and I was a principal, started a school in New York in 2009, and I've been in education in different roles this whole time. For me, having moved out of the really gratifying but incredibly stressful work of the day-to-day of a school, I've always been asking myself, what can my impact be? How can I take everything that I've learned about education, about working with families, about working with students, and have a larger impact? As I became the parent of a child who attends PS 133, in addition to my own education background and my own work, and I'm currently an educational consultant. I work with a national nonprofit that works with schools across the country. I thought, this is actually part of what's missing in our local government is just a voice and someone who has the background in education, who can both lead us through this tremendously unique time in our country when it comes to education post-pandemic, but also the skills that I've built through that work. They're not the skills of having been in government or politics for 20 years, but I do know and enjoy how to work with communities, come up with solutions, figure out if something's not working, how do we make it work? Like if I'm principal of a school and I schedule parent-teacher conferences and my parents don't come, I've got to figure out what I did wrong at my school to make sure it's accessible for parents. So that kind of real common sense problem solving is something I do well at and something I wanted to continue. With that, being on Community Education Council in District 13, and for folks who don't know, that's an elected parent position. You have district-wide, I call it a district-wide seat at the table where you're able to amplify parent voice. You don't have decision-making power except over zoning lines. I have been very lucky because in my last 2 years on CEC 13, we've had an incredible superintendent and Superintendent Samuels, who's had a vision for creating an anti-racist district. 13, which is different than 15 in some ways, is very, like most of New York City, very segregated. We have some schools that have PTAs that raise a lot of money, some schools that are under enrolled. The resources are not equal across the district. And so through my work on the CEC the past 2 years, I've been able to see how do I work with others who share my vision for kids first and educational equity, but have come about it through different ways. There, I'm the only person who's an educator as well. And then how can I work with others? If I can do it in this district context, then wouldn't it be exciting to be able to do that across the whole city, but across the whole district and part of the city to really bring that point of view and that representation of city council. So that's how I ended up here.
Well, this is an excellent segue right into desegregation, which is one of our topics that we're struggling with here in our district, even though we have a middle school desegregation plan in place. So let's start with this question and then if you can just expand out to how you would approach this as a council person. Um, so in District 13, you were mentioning you're struggling with sort of the same issues and wanted to take a small piece and make it larger. So just get us acquainted with some of what you've accomplished in District 13 with the CEC panel, and how you might apply whatever you learned from that moment to a larger context.
Sure. So I think there are many factors which I would point to and others would point to as making the work in 13 a success. I hesitate to say success because I think success will be when every family is excited about the options of school for their kid and they feel like their kid is safe and thriving at their school. We're not there yet, but we're working toward it. I think in 13 we have an incredible visionary superintendent who said this past summer, we're not going to keep waiting. We're going to make this change happen now. What can we do now? Change is slow to happen in education, particularly in this city. With that, to have the supportive CEC, to have the supportive principals, to have the supportive overall parent body, you have this wonderful moment where all the stakeholders want to see this change happen. And so that is the place we want to get to across any school district, city council district, city, of having people saying, I want this, how do I do it? I want this, what are the next steps? And that's a process of community engagement and building trust and interest from families. So it's very hard. I don't want to say that that's easy. But in terms of some steps I've taken on CEC, we recently passed 2 resolutions. So resolutions are, if people aren't familiar, like statements of point of view. They're not binding when you pass a resolution as a CEC, but they demonstrate the beliefs that the CEC has. We passed 2 consequential resolutions in the past couple months, one saying no gifted and talented, and the second one saying no screens in middle schools. It's different than District 15. One difference in 13 is schools with the screens aren't as enrolled as in 15. So even to say that to people who are familiar with it from 15, it's very different. But for us as a CEC, it was saying, if we as individuals and as a collective believe in this vision of an anti-racist district, of a district that's breaking free of issues of systemic racism, these are the steps we need to take to remove some of these current systems that are perpetuating this inequitable education for our kids. So those are some of the actual steps I've taken. I've worked for the last year also facilitating our anti-racism town halls, and also have broken off into a parent working group. And so we're a set of parents from District 13 who have said, let's talk about this question of resources. Nicole Hannah-Jones, who's also a District 13 parent, came to speak to us at one of the town halls, just talked about resources have been inequitable since this country was founded, right? So what do we do we reallocate resources? Do we shift resources? And then very specifically, PTA funding. Do we ask some PTAs, my son's school raises a great deal of money, to put in more money and give that to schools where parents aren't able to do that? It's been such an interesting journey. And it goes to show that you just have to talk to people, because we went into it saying, this is the answer. We're going to get to equity by modeling for the whole district that PTAs need to fund money. We don't have a solution yet. We don't totally have a recommendation, but the path we're on now is realizing, wow, a lot of parents don't see their role as a parent in the district as being one of outside of their child, which makes sense. I'm a mom, we just see our kid first. But there were less people than we realized who said, yes, I would give money and give it to a pot, or give money and have it spread around. And with that, we just came back to this question of, is this even right? Should we even be having parents raising money for schools? Because shouldn't schools just have fair student funding? So it's brought us back to these issues that I would really like to work on city council, which is making sure we have the budget for our schools, making sure we maintain this fair student funding, making sure that every school across the city is one that's safe and rigorous in preparing kids for college and career. And then also with the money that we're just getting from the federal government, to be able to say and have an have input on, okay, the DOE is getting so much money. What do we do to make this money not just help us short term to recover from COVID, but use this money that's coming without so many strings long term, so that we're building capacity in our communities so we can have this vision for equitable education long after this money is gone.
I think this idea of, I'll just ask you this question and then we'll get on to another topic. This idea of sharing resource in the district is one that has come up since I was on the PTA, and it's always an issue that people think about and try to get off the ground, and it's never really had traction, no matter how we try to approach it. And of course, part of the difficulty of dealing with a lopsided resource is that that's not really a council decision exactly. Instead, you're using your voice and your platform to sort of push forward an issue. So, so my question is this: when you're talking about sharing resource and you're speaking specifically about resource that an individual has given to a school that they hope will benefit their child, and you're speaking as a person whose role is not going to really change that, right? What can you do? What levers are there available to you as a council person to pull to kind of get things moving?
I think a lot of the lever as a council person is actually in some ways similar to CEC, where it's about information and influence. It's about giving people the information they need and then engaging in discussion and conversation, working to influence them to the decision or the idea that you have. I say that though, but I saw, like, if you have a real community engagement process, you don't always get to the solution that you thought. Like when we started the working group, we were like, we will get everyone to pool their money and we will make it happen, because it's difficult, like logistically, to make it happen. And then through the process, finding out, oh, maybe this isn't the right solution. Like, it's actually a lot of individual conversations. It's a lot of debunking myths about school funding and dealing with microaggressions and implicit bias and racism. And so it's brought to us, okay, well then maybe our work needs to be around educating families on this topic. And so when I think about the work of a city council person, I think it's so key to have an idea and have your vision for what you think the answer is and work with the folks who really know, but then also to be open to, once you go and talk to your constituents, that might not be the right lever. There might be, so through the, as for this as an example, we spoke to someone from the budget office at the DOE who said, okay, then use your parent voice to continue to lobby for fair student funding, which is not something we'd been doing in our CEC. So I think it's also figuring out in a specific bureaucracy, in a large city system, where are the places where you can have that influence and where can you rally people around. Like, fair student funding does not sound as interesting and tactical as like PTA funding. Then you feel like I gave extra money and now I helped this other kid. Fair student funding is a systemic solution. And so I think it's about engagement, building capacity in people, sharing information, conversations, and then being willing to shift to get to that ultimate goal. Here, the ultimate goal is no school should be fighting for funding for kids. Like, all kids should have the money that they need. Fair student funding, gives more money to kids who need more. And like, we should all be rallying behind that. And if that's what we need to do, that's how we need to work to get to that solution. So I would approach it in a similar way on council as well.
So Jessica, just to follow up on that a little bit, but also to pivot a bit, in terms of outreach to the district, I mean, it's a very large and very diverse district. What vision do you have for how you would engage with the constituency, and how would you communicate with us what you're working on and how we can help you be effective in your position?
I love that question of communicating. I think that's so key. Something I work on in every role that I have is, people should know what you're doing. I mean, the number one question I get when I tell people I'm running is that my district? Am I in District 39? Like, people don't know, or people say, No, I'm in District 15. Oh, that's your school district, but your city council district is District 39. So part of my vision would be that people know which city council district they're in because they're proud to be in the district and they're aware of what's happening in the district and they've been informed of what's happening in the district. And I think you can only get there by having, I know Shahana did this in her work, having those outposts in different communities. You can't just have one place where people have to go or people have to call or people have to access. You have to have people in every corner of the community. I think part of that is logistical and part of that is just demonstrating to constituents, I want to know what's going on and I want to help you. I was just speaking to a constituent on Saturday who told me, she had called the current city council person's office to say, I think this was like maybe last winter. It had stuck with her. It was an old story, but she really wanted me to know. She had called because she had flooding in her basement. Flooding was so bad in the basement of her building, she could smell it, and it stood for so long, she could smell it on the 3rd floor. Nobody ever called her back. When she finally got a call back, the question was, you got to call your block association. And so she and I kind of laughed because, and we talked earlier about the block I live on, even my block, which is mostly homeowners, doesn't have a block association. So we need to make sure that the next council person, people can call, that they get a response, that there's solutions, that we can direct them to solutions, that we have the capacity to do that, and that everyone in every corner of the district can do that. So that includes language accessibility, that includes physical proximity of districts, that includes outreach. So I feel energized by the opportunity to really get the word out so that everyone feels proud to be in District 39.
Let's, I'm just trying to think, okay, where do we go next? There are an infinite number of possibilities here. Let's get to affordable housing because that is an issue that affects our district so disparately. We have an insanely expensive area here in Park Slope. And we have a number of workers who haven't been in their jobs for a year. So lots of different issues. But the way that we have been approaching this issue is talking about the Gowanus rezoning, because it is the largest proposal that we are looking at to address this specifically. So, talk to us a little bit about how you see the Gowanus proposal from the theoretical standpoint, understanding that probably you will inherit the decision. So the first question is, that aside, how do you make sense of what we're looking at? And where do you fall on should it happen or should it not happen?
Sure. So, I mean, you started with affordable housing. We need to have more affordable housing in this community. And we need to give more people access to the same things that I moved here to have 15 years ago. A beautiful apartment. We talked about, I live next to a community garden, a school I can walk to, great local businesses and restaurants nearby. That's something that should be accessible to everyone, not just a family like mine that my husband and I happen to work 2 jobs that give us the money that we need to have purchased our apartment. And that is not the case for a lot of people. So we need to have more affordable housing in our community so that we are sharing the resources in our community with a wide variety of people. With Gowanus, I oppose the plan as it is. And I know you've heard this from the other candidates. I think I'm sure I oppose it for the same reason around community engagement. And I want to say, I'm sure that to some degree, someone who's in support of the plan might say, well, you could never have enough community engagement. You're never going to have everyone agree with you. But what does it mean if we're willing to move forward with a plan that on the surface looks as though we're putting affordable housing in a dangerous place in terms of the contaminants? I know that the EPA data and everything says that won't be the case. That's very hard to believe, like on an emotional level, that will be the case. And then very specifically and structurally, when you dig into the details of that plan, there's this issue around the sewage tanks, and that the rezoning area, being in the flood area, the way that the storage tanks are currently built, it only will maintain 80% of the current volume of sewage. That's before we bring anyone else in, and there's no plans to make further capacity of these sewage tanks. And so that was really interesting to me when I dug in, because I thought, wow, people have been working on this plan for so long. That seems like something that, I don't know, I'm not a structural engineer, the kind of engineer that builds sewage tanks, but what's happening in this process, that we have communities that don't feel involved, we have communities asking for things that they're not getting, and we have these actual things like the sewage tanks that just don't seem to add up. So I know that whoever is in office is going to inherit it. And so I think it's really important that we keep asking these questions. We make sure that it's safe. You know, I've shared in other places. I grew up in a town that had industrial contaminants in our dirt. Lots of people got cancer. They can't prove that it was GE that got the contaminants in the earth that gave the people the cancer, but whoa, all the people who live in that side of town all have cancer, and that's where GE dumped their contaminants. So that stays with me, in this idea of, it doesn't sound good to put people in that place. It doesn't seem like we have the capacity to do it. And there's still members of our community who are saying they're not heard. So I would want to make sure that all of those things are front and center if I'm elected, to say, all right, how can we mitigate these issues, if at all, to argue for larger sewage tanks, to make sure that it stays clean, and to make sure communities are getting what they need.
So, so with that Gowanus proposal, and by now we've mentioned this enough times, so there is, of course, the coalition, which seems to be, their proposal seems to be picking up some traction amongst the councilmen who would be voting on this plan. So that's why we keep referring to it. But they have these non-negotiables, and one of the non-negotiables, besides dealing with the sewage tanks, is funding the NYCHA housing that's nearby, that is outside of the border of what is being proposed. So it would be ancillary to the plan. Mm-hmm. So in your role, it would fall to you to champion that cause. And that also seems to be one of those things that is not as baked into the contract as other things. And so you're going to have to fight for that one. Mm-hmm. So how would you accomplish that? Mm-hmm. If we assume that the city is falling behind on its commitment to those houses, how would you champion their cause?
Sure. So I support that plan. I support that group. I agree, as I think all of my colleagues do, that we should be supporting what they're asking for as well. It certainly is tricky that it calls to question, why do NYCHA tenants have to ask for this solution? Like, why as a city are we not providing the supports that NYCHA tenants need for basic things? Heat, hot water, electricity, never mind cleanliness, safety. Like, these should be things we're providing as a city in our NYCHA housing as a rule, as part of policy. That doesn't have to be baked into other plans. When I was a principal in Brownsville, where my school is located, is in the center of the highest density of different NYCHA housing in the city. And so as being part of my community, going to my students' homes, doing community outreach, I've spent a fair amount of time in the housing that my students were in. And the issues that I know they faced are the same issues here that I just listed: repairs, cleanliness, safety. I mean, these are real issues that people are facing every day. So sure, I don't think people should have to wait for a solution to that. So if we can get them a solution to that faster by baking it into the plan, great. But I also think we need a vision to really say, what are we going to do to support NYCHA housing across the city so that our community members have these basic housing human rights that they need in their living conditions.
As we're thinking a little bit about longer term plans and where we would put some of the money that we're expecting to come to us from the federal government, state, let's talk about some of the reforms that you would look at for the city at large that you would really champion. So would affordable housing make that cut as we're, and so funding NYCHA in particular over new builds or in equal weight to each?
I would say equally. I don't want, NYCHA residents shouldn't be suffering without these basic things right now. And we need more housing. We need more housing so that people who work in our communities can live in our communities. It shouldn't be that I can live here and walk down the street, but the person that works at my pharmacy or cafe can't afford to live here. So I would say both. That would definitely be a big priority.
And so when we talk about funding affordable housing, like what does that mean? Do you mean that the city should get back into the affordable housing business? Do you mean that you would support kind of our current structure, which is letting a private developer do it, but give them more density for it? Or are you talking about like a land trust or something like that?
Yeah, so I know more about education than I know about housing. So the first thing I would want to do is make sure that I have folks on my team who have been steeped in this work in the same way I've been steeped in education. But here's what I do know. It doesn't seem to be working to have these folks making money off of building this new housing, like using Gowanus as an example, or any of the new builds on 4th Avenue or all around. And it's not meeting the demand. It's not meeting the needs of our community in the way that I think perhaps on paper people believe it will. So I do think there needs to be a different plan to build more housing, and the idea of the land trust or the city owning it could potentially be another solution so that we're not just in the pockets of the people making money from these bills. That just doesn't seem like it's working that well.
And as you think about where you would invest money or divest money, what comes to you besides housing?
Yep. Definitely education. I think we want to make sure that like we talked about earlier, schools have what they need, both short term to ensure that we're accelerating learning for kids after they've been out of school for months to a year, as well as attending to their social emotional needs. I think those are two huge priorities with education. I also think long term, we need to make sure that the DOE has the budget to staff their schools, to provide training, to ensure that all schools are schools that families are excited to go to, feel that their kid is going to get a real 21st century education there. In other topics, I do think that we need to take money from this very bloated, highest in the country NYPD budget and start to use some of that money on things and initiatives that will actually help people. So when I think about moving money from that budget, I'm thinking about cutting the money that's funding so much of this militarization of our police, which sure, most people in our community do not agree with. We shouldn't have so much money on tear gas and helicopters that are over my apartment every time that there's a Black Lives Matter rally, or we had one for DMX's funeral. I mean, it is like, I live near Barclays. It can be incessant to have these helicopters overhead. And it's such a visceral reminder of, wow, why are we spending money on this when we have kids who don't have broadband in their homeless shelter in our district? So I want to make sure that we're taking money where we really don't need it from that budget. So militarization, spending money on wellness and safety, making sure we have mental health professionals responding, not police where that doesn't make sense. And then also making sure that we have training. I know that in some ways this is a bit of a contentious idea, but I don't think we're going to get rid of the police, but I do think we need to retrain and change the mindset of the police and really think about, what does it mean to be a part of your community? What does it mean to know folks and help them and support them and help them feel safe, and not be, I'll just period, know folks and help them and be safe. So affordable housing, education, moving the money from the NYPD, and also making sure that we have money for our local businesses. Our local businesses are suffering. we all walk up and down the street on our blocks and see how many places are closed. And when I've talked to the folks in the businesses near me, I hear them saying it's just really hard. Don't have tourism, got this new COVID protocols, not the same amount of capacity, whether it's a restaurant or a store or a spa. They need cash flow. They need money to pay their rent and pay their bills. And in situations where the landlords are not accommodating or maybe are unable to do it, I think we need to come up with other solutions and use that money to really fund folks so we can make it through this next period of time and bring our city back to a time where it's flourishing.
So just kind of on one of the topics you just mentioned, how would you support, it's funny, Sylvia has texted me this question just as I'm thinking of it also. How do you feel about commercial rent regulation? Is that something that you would support, something you would champion to help keep small business owners in their shops?
I think we need to keep small business owners in their shops. And I have heard from both business owners who've been pushed out. So I'm thinking of Demise Spa over here on 5th in Lincoln, right near us. It sounds like Christy.
And our heart breaks for her and the loss of that business.
Yes, and she lost that business because the landlord was unwilling to work with her. And there's plenty of rumors about what the landlord's trying to do. I actually heard recently that the landlord is doing lots of other things that were not great. So to be a business owner in that situation, like what can she do? I mean, I went to a rally. I don't know if you guys were part of that as well, but we stood outside the spa and like had a rally with our masks on over the summer to say, how terrible is this, that this huge corporate landowner is pushing out this small spa that was considered one of the best spas in New York City. And that's a spa. That's a thing that I'm lucky to have enough disposable income to go to. But that was a woman in our community who owned that business who now doesn't have that business anymore. So I do want to make sure that we have this assistance available so that the business owners can make it through this time, can have their businesses. And specifically for small landlords, because I've heard from them as well, they feel like I have to pay my bills too. No one's helping me. So making sure that everyone has the support they need, and there are regulations on these larger landlords so that the businesses can stay.
So just to stick on the business topic for a minute, and then I'm going to pivot real quick back to NYPD. So there were some statistics, and the vacancy rate in 2007 was 4%. In 2017, so just 10 years later, 5.8%, and now we're not even talking about COVID times. At the same time, so we know that there is a need. And on top of that, the outer boroughs like ours were hit much harder than in Manhattan. Okay, so we know that there is a need. We know that a neighborhood like ours is probably seeing it a little more acutely than elsewhere. At the same time, the commercial rent control laws that did exist at one point in our history expired in 1963. There is a rent control law that sort of floated by with not really much traction. So while we are all, as consumers, enthusiastic about it, there doesn't seem to be much movement on that bill. So how would you actually take this ideology and put it into practice and get that bill into a place that can actually help people?
I think I'm hesitating. So I'm like, this sounds like very like la la la, but I do think we need to get people in the same room to hear from one another. I don't doubt that Daniela at Demai made sure that the landlord understood the actual emotional, financial, lifelong impact he was having on her when that business closed. But what else can we do to also make sure that we are working with people to understand, the people who need to vote for these regulations and these laws, why it's so important, how it's beneficial to our community, and then outside of just making more money, what can we do to support the landlords who are, sorry, I'm hesitating because I'm like, why am I defending commercial landlords? But they have their point of view as well. So what do we do to make sure that they have what they need, but there are these regulations so that they're not able to essentially prey upon these businesses and turn people out of their businesses because they're saying, hey, I can get another tenant. Because that was the thing that I think opened my eyes as a consumer in the last year. Was I would walk down the street at the beginning of COVID and say, why are all these places closing? Like, don't the landlords need rent? don't they know no one else is going to move in? And then learning more about it and understanding that that's not the case, and there are these protections for the landlords, that really troubled me to say, okay, if another business on my block, if Pink Olive closes and that landlord doesn't care because that landlord can just sit on that property and not even need to collect more rent, like that is not incentivizing a community to maintain their small businesses. So I do think we'd want to have more conversations about it so that we could get everyone to vote for those regulations, which will support our businesses, which, and I don't want to sound too starry-eyed, but I would hope after literally everyone has seen what's happened during COVID, that there would be more momentum to support communities in this unique time in a way there might not have been even just a few years ago when it just seemed like a commerce issue alone.
So going back to the NYPD, I just wanted to sort of clarify how you envision that going. So I heard you saying that you want to demilitarize, cut the spending in that way. But would you advocate for actually cutting the force, the size of the force?
I'll be honest, I don't have the data in front of me about the size of the force. I guess the reason that hasn't been at the front of my mind is I'm thinking if you're taking the money away, you're adding it to these supports that will help communities. You're also making sure that the people who are currently on the force have what they need to do their job in the best way possible, not in a violent or racist way. That number, I would want to look at the data and see, but that number seems in a way less, I guess that's why it's less on the front of my mind. I mean, you know, when you think about NYPD, I think sometimes we're talking about it as though it's like this academic exercise and what do we do about policing? But there's people across our city who are affected by this differently. And so I want to make sure that, you know, I'm looking at this not just as a Park Slope mom who's mom to a white son, that I'm not going to have to worry when he grows up that like he could accidentally be hurt by the police. At the same time, I've been a principal in Brownsville where I had families who felt unsafe on some days sending their kids from their home to the school, even just a few blocks away because of gun violence. And so thinking about those families, I'm not sure that I would want to ask them again on May 26, 2021, but the instinct there isn't always let's get rid of the police, it's let's figure out how to reform the police. And so I think for me on city council, I'd want to make sure I'm talking to all the constituents in my district, as well as thinking about us as a city and what do all of our constituents want. And so how do we reform in a way that gets everyone what they need and they feel safe and no one's worrying about their life when it comes to the police. Also making sure people have jobs, also making sure that it doesn't have this incredibly bloated budget where we don't have to say, we don't have money for this, we don't have money for that. We could be moving money from that budget to other places.
Would you support details like or reforms like requiring police to live within a certain distance of where they're stationed?
I would. I love that. I think it's really, when I became a principal, and I was one of the few white leaders in my community, my families who were all Black and brown said to me, "Oh, where in Long Island do you live?" Oh, I don't live on Long Island. And I didn't get it at first, but to understand that for many of the folks who work for our city, teachers, leaders, police, they don't live in our communities. I think that's really unfortunate. I will make one caveat, which is I have also heard from community members who grew up in Brooklyn, who then perhaps grew up in a community where some people want to go live in the suburbs. And I do think that there should be some way to allow people to do that as well. So you don't have to stay in your community the whole time. I think particularly for some folks I've talked to, people of color who've grown up here, like they want to go live on Long Island and like not live here anymore. That's okay. But I do support it. It it doesn't feel right. It doesn't seem right to have all these people who live here in the day and then disperse across the suburbs when other folks are here at night. So I would want to figure out how to do that in a thoughtful way so we could increase the amount of public workers who are living in the city.
And I always feel like it goes hand in hand with the affordable housing issue, where for those first few years as a police officer, you're not really making that much. I mean, it goes up, of course, and your benefits will definitely kick in at some point in time, but it's not easy to afford a home in the place that you're working, and no matter what your industry is. So
Absolutely.
So that's something to be mindful of also, I think, but an interesting proposal nonetheless. So one of the things that I wanted to ask about is about social services. So they put together, the Department of Social Services put together a $98.6 billion spending proposal. But there was a lot of criticism, and that was that it didn't do enough to help families and individuals in shelters find long-term housing, because it didn't ultimately increase the vouchers that they were getting, which have a mixed success rate of use, right? Like not all the landlords take them. They're not enough. They're under market value. So would you support and push for increases in those rental subsidies? Let's do that question first.
Yes, absolutely. And I've been on the other end of this. So I've seen families transitioning out of shelters, trying to move to more permanent housing or other shelters because they're pushed out of one shelter system to another, and they get moved around, like from Brownsville to the Bronx. So families who are either have been in a community or are trying to establish in a community, then getting uprooted and having to go somewhere else simply because of their housing, which they desperately need. But then the kids get pulled out of the school, they get pulled out of their services, they get pulled out of their communities, their friend circles. And so whatever we can do to support families in getting the housing they need in the communities where they want to be, I think is really important, because it's sometimes people like, well, they're so lucky. Like, no, they're not lucky. Like their whole life was disrupted on this random day of whatever month, and that's not okay. So I definitely support more permanent solutions for them.
And in a slightly different vein, what is your thought about congregate living? The turning some hotels into shelters has been really helpful for some, not all, but for some it's been a real lifesaver. So how do you envision that going forward?
I think as a short-term solution, if that works, we should be doing it. Like we should be doing, I feel the way about housing I feel about education. Like we can have a lot of ideas, but like right now there's kids who need to learn. Like right now there's people who need housing. So what do we need to do right now to make sure people can be safe and thrive? And if that is the congregate housing and using hotels in that way, absolutely. I also think that in certain communities, including our own, we need to really be thinking about like, what does it mean to be living by our progressive values, and how do we make sure that everything that we do in our community is allowing other people in? And I think that has been something that's been a tough conversation I've had with neighbors and folks at the playground when our kids are playing about, oh, this shelter's moving in or this or that, and that I think is a place where as individuals, we have a real opportunity to really live our beliefs and say to other people, like, if we believe that people deserve housing, then we have to figure out how to make this work in our community. Because I think that's one of the biggest barriers that we see to when these housing proposals are made and people say, not in my backyard. So that's something I'd want to address as well.
We're going to step away from this issue and get right into transportation. So on our Facebook page, I don't know if you check it out ever, but it is a big issue. Parking and biking, e-biking in particular. So lots of different components to the things that we react to on our streetscape. So from your perspective as a person who is uh, running for office, what are you seeing as our largest transportation issues, and how would you address those?
So street safety and transportation, I know, are top of mind for voters that I talk to. As a mom who still makes my 8-year-old hold my hand as we cross the street every day, I think, street safety is really important to all of us. And I want to make sure we have more safety for bikes and bike lanes and access. All of that is important. But when it comes down to the safety and transportation that all of us deal with, I actually go to just back to the walking. Like, we need to have a neighborhood where we can walk safely from place to place. So that means we have well-maintained paved sidewalks that people with mobility issues can move on, families with strollers can move on, that there's curb cuts at every corner, that our sidewalks are clean. Some of those issues come up a lot when I'm talking to voters. The other issues that I know are on voters' minds right now are issues of drag racing and it just being people speeding and double parking and just lots of noise and kind of nuisance on their block. So figuring out solutions to make sure that folks are not, that's not negatively impacting people's quality of life. And then finally, with transportation, I do think that we need to make sure that we have these amazing bus routes back, and that the buses are, people should be able to get from one place to another on the bus. And especially in a community like ours where the subway sometimes makes sense and sometimes doesn't, just based on exactly where you're going, then the bus should make sense. So we need to make sure that the bus service is in a way that I can say I need to go from here to there, and I have a way to do that, especially if I'm not biking or walking and I need that transportation.
And so would you propose like streets for bus traffic only, or would you, or would you put your energy into like walkable streets, like closed streets like we have up Fifth Avenue? Are those options that you would
Yeah,
support?
I would be open to all of those. I mean, I love the closed streets on Fifth Avenue. I was just saying to Mark from the bid on Sunday that, every Saturday I walk from my apartment to Gotham Gymnastics to pick up my son, and it's like this sign that it's the weekend at 11 o'clock where the street closes off. I also hear the impact of that on the other side of my street where, more cars on 6th Avenue, can't really get takeout on a Saturday. Cars can't really drive around. And there was a game at Barclays on Saturday night. So, I do think that we need to figure out what are the solutions that are beneficial to everyone. I would want to talk to the community. And I know there are community proposals around making 8th Avenue 2 ways, making some streets for buses. I don't have all the information to know the decision I would make right now, but would want to talk to folks about making sure that people feel safe, people can get to where they want to be, and that it's an opportunity for us to support our businesses as well. So figuring out how do we balance all of those things, and then bring our community along with us, because with every solution to each of those transportation problems, I think just like anything in government, you're going to have someone happy and someone unhappy. So how do we continue to make sure we're making the decision in the best interest of everyone and bringing everyone else along with us for that decision?
So, as our final question to you, if you could only accomplish one thing in your 2-year term that we would be electing you to around, whatever the prepositional phrase is, if you could only accomplish one thing in that term, what would that thing be?
For me, it's education, really getting to integrated schools and really getting everyone to understand what that means, and that doesn't mean moving, this group of students into this place and this group of students from this place, although that's one way to do it, but really making sure that all of our schools are schools where everyone wants to attend. Right now in District 13, there's an initiative the superintendent's working on to make more of our schools IB schools, and IB is a program that many consider to be very rigorous and prepare kids for college. So I think that kind of thinking of making sure that schools that maybe aren't schools that other folks would want to go to, there's reasons to get folks there. I think you have to have this multi-pronged approach. And I think for City Council, we have such an opportunity to work with our local school districts, to work with the DOE and really support some of these initiatives so that education can continue to thrive in our city. So I would love to accomplish that in 2 years.
That is an optimistic, it's an optimistic view, but I love that. Christy, you got any question? You got anything to follow up on?
No, we're good, I think.
Great. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us, for spending an hour of your evening. We really appreciate your time and your thoughts on these.
Appreciate you all as well. And I think I can put this on Facebook or you have it. If anyone watches this or is listening and has questions, I love talking to folks. Happy to engage in individual conversations with folks about anything I didn't get to as well.
A few people have put following the conversations into the feed their information.
Okay.
So we invite you to do that as well for some outreach.
Perfect. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Park Slope, that's it. We're done for now. We're waiting on one last candidate to give us some time, and if he commits, we would be happy to have him on. If not, I think we're good. Stay tuned. We'll have we're trying to work out a couple of intro to voting type things to help you get acquainted with the ranked choice voting, which is in place today. And besides that, we're out. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your week and weekend.